We're letting a few more people sign in and jump into the conference, and we're going to get started here in one more minute. All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about how do we strategically develop a plan, leveraging what's called voice of customer research. I don't know if you've read the studies, but as high as 80% of teams last year did not reach their plan. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I would argue that a big piece of it is their customers have changed. Something about their customer has changed. Maybe something in their company has changed, and sales just weren't as strong as they should have been. So, what today's all about is voice of customer research has always kind of been my secret sauce. I've helped companies grow almost 40 years now. I've been the president of a couple of companies, CEO of a couple of companies, but today, and for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, I help other companies. I wrote a book called Driving Explosive Growth. We're going to talk about my next book here just on voice of customer. But when a CEO or a leadership team comes to me and they say, look, Mark, we want to grow. We want to grow faster than the industry average. The first thing I want to do is do some customer research. As I said, I wrote a book. It was called Driving Explosive Growth. And in the book, I laid out a process where I highly encourage people to interview their customers. And it was interesting because that part of the book created a lot of feedback. Tell me more, help me understand. So I wrote another book, Voice of Customer. And as the image shows, think of an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg that everybody sees is really the smallest part. And the data that we need, the actionable insights that we need is below the surface. So how do we do that? Well, one way is we do voice of customer research. I didn't invent voice of customer research. It's been around a long time. It's a Lean Six Sigma principle. But when you start looking under the surface, what are things we need to know? Well, customer challenges. Are our customers satisfied? Customer insights, customer trends, industry trends. What are some of their constraints? Are they referring people to us? What's their buying criteria today? All of those things are critical for our future success. So again, I wrote that book. I've been doing this just under 40 years. And what my goal today is if you're not familiar with voice of customer, you become a fan and you actually leverage some of what we're talking about today so that you have a really strong 2025. So the question that I like to ask is, how will you make it easier to be a customer and harder to be one of your competitors? The insights that you're going to need to answer that question are all found with your customers today. So again, I want you to think about that. Voice of customer research helps you be one of the few companies that achieve your plan, but it also makes your company much more difficult to compete with. So today we're going to discuss, how do you even harness the customer feedback? How does harnessing the feedback improve sales results? How do we improve customer satisfaction? How do we gain a competitive advantage and put it all together and turn it into explosive growth? So what you should expect is I'm going to talk about voice of customer research. I'm going to ask you questions where I'm going to ask you to participate in the chat, and we're all going to work through this together. I was really struggling to decide what to call what I do. And what I ended up coming up with about 25 years ago is no smoke and mirrors. I don't believe in, making things up. I don't believe in developing products because we can and not because we should. When I teach salespeople, I have an entire chapter in my book on human to human selling. We're not going to teach tricks, manipulation. We're going to become a trusted advisors for our clients. We're going to be sharing industry best practices. We're going to have an intimate knowledge of some of their challenges and outcomes that they want. And the way we do that is just by really understanding our customers. So, question for you, and again, real quick, in the chat, just put in a Y or an N. Do you think your sales team's going to hit your 2025 plan? Kind of an odd question. We just started. It's like, my goodness, Mark, we better. But go ahead, put it in the chat if you believe yes or no. Quite a few yeses. Awesome. The reason I ask is I speak at a lot of events, and I spoke at an event out in Colorado, and we asked a room full, about 300 CEOs, CFOs, CROs, will your team hit plan? And of course, everybody said, oh, yeah, we're going to hit plan. And then I asked the next question, does 100% of your team have the skills, tools, processes to hit your plan? Not one hand went up. So I said, okay, how about 70%? 70% of your team is ready and able to execute your plan. No hands went up. So I kept asking, and when I started getting into 40, 30%, a lot of hands started coming up. So what gives me pause is they believe, and maybe you believe, that we're going to hit our plan, but there's some things that you just don't feel 100% on yet. And I would argue that some of those things are your customers. What's new? What's changed? What's their biggest challenge this year? How are they reacting to the recent election? What's going on in their markets? These are all questions we have to answer. I talked to a lot of business owners, and I keep hearing something that sounds like this. What's always worked for years to grow our companies, not driving the revenue and profit growth we expected. So doing what we've always done around here isn't working. And I would argue one of the big reasons is the pandemic. Think about how much your company has changed since the pandemic. Now think about how much your customer's business has changed. But the burden is on us to figure out what changed, what do they need, what are they dealing with, and how do we help them with their challenges and constraints today? How do we develop strategies and tactics to achieve our revenue and profit plans? I know a big frustration as I talk to owners and CEOs is they get projections and it sounds like we're going to have a really good first quarter. And then all of a sudden, usually right before the board meeting, they find out we're not going to hit it. Or we're going to hit revenue, but we're going to miss profit. One way to avoid those kind of awkward board meetings and awkward discussions with your business owner is to really understand what's going on with your customers and present just perfect solutions that align and resonate with them. Understand shifts and quickly adapt. I know when the Ukraine war started, quite a few of my clients in the building and supply industry were buying products that were pretty much only made in the Ukraine. So within weeks, their entire supply chain stopped. I have other clients in the food spices industry. And again, a large percentage of their raw materials came from the Ukraine. So there was a huge shift, and their customers heard about it. They were nervous about it. And when we interviewed them, we quickly understood what their concerns were, and we developed communication strategies to get them through it. Our goal is we launch strategic plans leveraging customer insights. Those plans are going to deliver revenue and profit, and like I said, the title of my first book, Explosive Growth. Well, what do you mean by explosive growth? If your company wants to grow 2-3% a year, that's fine. I would argue that if that's your goal, then you're setting out to decline just because of accounts that leave or accounts that change and their revenue declines. I typically help businesses that want to grow 15, 20, 30% year over year. And the way that I help them do that is interviewing their customers. So what do we want to know? Well, we need to understand our customers today. We want to identify actionable insights. We're going to interview a statistically significant number of your customers. One of the largest projects we did was 450 interviews for a very large manufacturer in the agriculture area. But typically, it's not that many. And then what we do is we deliver what we call an executive brief. We're going to give you all the data in an Excel spreadsheet, every person we spoke to, every question we asked, and how they answered it, which becomes a business development opportunity in the future. But more importantly, we create an executive brief. In that brief, we identify 3 to 5 big insights that are going to move your business, challenges that your customers are facing, and we're going to talk about them, and then create strategies to solve those challenges. Maybe they have constraints, labor constraints. Maybe they're concerned about some of their raw materials coming in from China now and tariffs. Whatever they say, we'll create strategies based on what they're saying today. And then we need to train your team. As I said, one of the outcomes that I really enjoy is taking the raw data by customer, dividing it by salesperson, and I never give the salespeople the exact data file, because what we never want is for a salesperson to call a customer and say, hey, why did you say, yeah, that breaches trust? Second, it makes the customer feel like it was a gimmick. And again, I keep saying, if we do it, you can hire a third party, you can do it yourself. We're going to talk a little bit later on who in your company should do it and who should never do it. But the goal is to come up with actionable insights, 3 to 5, what I would call pillars. And then we create plans for each of those. I call it doing an MRI on your business. If you weren't feeling well, you would go to the doctor, and hopefully your doctor wouldn't say, well, I'm going to sedate you and start surgery. What they would say is, let's run some tests, let's do some blood work, let's get to the root of what's going on. And that's really what we do with voice of customer research. So what do we need to understand as we make sure that our plans resonate and all our plans in each one of our business segments come in at or above goal? Number one, understand the voice of your customers, and that's what we're here to talk about today. In my book, I also talk about how effective is your sales team. It goes back to that conference in Colorado where quite a few of the people had doubts. And typically, sales teams really understand your product, your service, how to do business with your company, the applications that your product solves. But 50% of salespeople have never been trained in sales skills. So what might happen is they're not asking the right questions. They don't feel comfortable. 67% of salespeople struggle with closing. The other thing we want to look at is your website working? That's a topic for another webinar. But real simple, you can create an assessment and tell you real quick how your website's performing compared to maybe your top 3 competitors. And then your transaction data. Talk about powerful information. What's my net profit by customer? If you're not familiar with that, net profit by customer is something an analyst will run. They pull the data out of your ERP system, and then we look at the cost, we look at the sale, but we also take into consideration the cost of sale. What are we spending to get that business? And then we create net profit by customer. We look at what trends we should consider, what's happening. We're going to talk about some trends that are coming up in so many of our calls, but we really need to find out with your customers in your industries. Maybe you sell through distribution in your channels. And then again, after we've assessed our teams, where do they need upskilling? Oh, at the end, I'm going to give you a link to a free assessment. We're not going to be covering sales effectiveness today, but you could take like a free assessment. I don't see the results. It's just a tool to help guide you to find out if you feel 100% confident your team is ready for this year. So what do we need to know? Well, in the book, I share some of the basics, but real fundamental. Why do people buy from you? The answer often just surprises people. I'll talk a little bit later about a company that manufactures vans for handicapped people and people in wheelchairs so that they could drive again. And when they asked me to help them, I asked them, why do people buy from you? And everybody started talking about all this technological advancements and how the thing works. But when I went out in the market, I interviewed customers in wheelchairs, and what they said was, well, I bought the van because it's quiet. Nowhere on their website did it say quiet. Nowhere in our distributor training did we teach salespeople to mention how quiet it was. So that's just an example. Why don't customers buy from you? Here we ask questions about share of wallet. Often when I ask sales teams, what share of wallet do you have with that customer? Oh, I've got the majority of the business. I've got 40, 50, 60% of the business. But when we actually interview the customer and not the salesperson interviewing them, it's typically 27 to 30%. If you have 60%, awesome. But that data point is actually going to help guide you on how you're going to grow this year. If you had 90%, then the opportunity of growing with your current accounts would be a lot less than, let's say, if it was 15%. What's their buying process today? We're seeing a lot of new faces. I don't know if you're on LinkedIn a lot, but almost every day I'm seeing 10, 12 people taking new jobs, people retiring out. Um, with those new people come new processes. And what criteria do they need? I know I was helping one client and they were dealing with a very large engine manufacturer and they were really frustrated. They were getting a lot of quotes, but their close rate was like under 20%. So we called and interviewed them. And what we found was the customer needed about three more pieces of information. And once we got that information, the close rates grew to over 40%. What are their goals and challenges? This is a fun part of whether we do it or whether your company does it. We open that up and let them talk. You'd be surprised with some of the things they're going to tell you. And some things will just validate what you already believe. And more important, are they satisfied? Are they happy today? Are they raving fans when they go to the conference with you and they're telling all their friends, entire network, how wonderful your company is? Or are they just a detractor? Are they unhappy? Are they sharing maybe things that you don't want other people hearing? What's your net promoter score? Are they referring other people to you? And then challenges and constraints. Is there a new constraint that's holding their business back that maybe your team can help with? All of those things become really valuable information as we go into the new year. So we want to harness customer feedback. Here's one of those places where I'm going to ask you to participate in the chat. How does your organization capture voice of customer today? Do you have your salespeople do it? Do you do surveys? I've spoken to quite a few people that do surveys. We have non-salespeople interviewing them. That's option C. In other words, product managers, marketing managers. Sometimes, and again, I'm a scaling up coach, we actually teach our teams to have each one of the leaders make 3 phone calls a week and check in on customers. Or do you hire third-party research? Quite a few companies do this. My only challenge with some third-party research is don't just give me the data, give me some insights on what to do with the data. I see some people have mentioned that they count on their reps to provide the feedback. Actually, that's the number one answer when I talk to companies. How do you understand what's going on with your customers today? Number one answer, that's my salesperson's job. I pay them to call on our customers, understand their challenges, and solve them with our solutions. Quite a few people do surveys. And I had mentioned earlier that really large customer in the ag business. The trouble was they were doing surveys, but they were getting like 1% response. And it really didn't turn into like actionable insights. It really didn't even validate some of the things they believed. So what we're recommending is interviews, one-on-one interviews. Surveys are a good tool to validate something that you believe, but if you want to get like new insights, we got to talk to humans, right? Human to human. Now, I'm recommending that it's not a salesperson. I helped a company that trained product managers. Product managers typically own voice of customers research along with marketing. But if you don't have those roles, then maybe the VP of sales who doesn't directly call on the customer, maybe other executives on the leadership team, or you hire third-party research, people like us that do it all the time. And the only reason I started doing it in the first place was to make the strategies work. In the past, I would sit down with a leadership team. They would give me all their understandings, and we would develop a strategy. And, often they would work, but sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes we were really far off. And it was no fault of theirs. A lot of the leaders would share what was important 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when they were out working with customers. But we kind of lost touch. What I find is some people have a understanding, but they don't have that intimate knowledge of what's going on with their customers. And that's what we really need to develop our strategies. When we create those strategies, outcomes include improved revenue, greater profits, and improved market share. So if those are things that you're looking at, again, I'd really appreciate you hanging to the end. Let's talk about some companies. Lyft. Lyft got a new CEO. He came over from Amazon, and to his credit, the first thing he did was get trained to be a Lyft driver. And he started driving people around and just asking customers questions. And what he discovered was female passengers would like the ability to pick a female driver. Does Uber and all those competitors know that? I don't know. But he put systems and processes in place, and that became an actionable insight. Salesforce, one of the top CRM companies in the world. They just announced they're enhancing AI integration. No surprise, everybody's talking about integration to help sales teams. I promise you, before they spent any money on any new system or process, they got the ideas from their customers. Nike, very popular brand. They're expanding their digital and direct-to-consumer sales. Why? I promise you it's because of research. I actually wrote a blog about this. If you want to go deeper into each one of these examples, it's on my blog. And again, my blog is no smoke and mirrors, pretty easy to remember. Or how about HubSpot, another company that I really admire. I follow what their CEO posts, but they're expanding their customer-centric growth initiatives. Customer-centric growth. Yeah, that's understanding your customers and developing systems and processes to take better care of your customers. So we've got a lot of companies doing this. So why not your company? Well, Mark, we're a small company. One of my clients is around 3.5 million, and they wanted to grow. Their vision, their owner's passion is he wants to get it up to 150, 200 million. Some of you on the call might think, wow, that's almost crazy. That's a BHAG that I don't know why you're letting him have, Mark. Well, one of the companies I helped was a plastics company. We were around 4-6 million, and we took it to 300 million and sold it at a much higher multiple than what the industry typically would pay for a plastics company. Why? Because we got really good at listening to the market. And we'll give you some examples of what we did here in a little bit. So why not your company? Whether you hire somebody outside, whether you read my book and take some of the questions out of the book. For example, my favorite question when I do voice of customer research is towards the end of the call, I ask the person, if you were the president of my client's company, what would you recommend to sell more to your company? And then be quiet. I remember one instance, a client was in the exhaust system. We asked one of their largest customers this, and the person talked for almost 30 minutes. They literally created a business growth plan. We created action items. We did what they wanted us to do, and the business more than doubled in the next 18 months. So here's a question. Could an outdated assumption about your customers be stalling your growth? I'm curious, does that make anybody feel uncomfortable? Just put it into the chat, yeah, a Y or an N. Could there be something going on that you're not aware of, or that your salespeople are saying that resonated maybe 3 to 5 years ago, but not resonating today? I see a couple people saying yes. Often, again, I'm a card-carrying salesperson. I was so blessed. Right out of college, I went to work for Frito-Lay. They invested 6 years of training in me, incredible training, turned me into a sales trainer. But we have to always do a gut check. We can't build strategies based on gut and intuition. We must build them based on data. So, question for you, and again, just put it into the chat. How often do you guys check in with your customers? How often does your business do voice of customer research? My favorite answer is the number one, which is, what is voice of customer research? I've had people ask me that. We count on our sales team to understand and share continuously. Oh, somebody said weekly, bi-weekly. Awesome. I'd love to have a conversation with you, maybe after this session. We conduct surveys every 2 to 3 years. That's another thing we hear. We conduct surveys every year. We do win-loss interviews. Our team also does those for very specific customers. We call every person that buys their particular machine because their machines are over $1 million. We also call everybody that didn't buy to find out why. We use a third party for customer research once about every 6 months. I see some people saying we check in with customers every quarter. Excellent. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir, it sounds like. What I hear most is we count on our sales team to understand and share with us what they hear. My challenge to you is, how receptive is your company to maybe feedback that's not politically correct? Maybe feedback that's going to ruffle some feathers. If there's not that psychological safety, that trust it's talked about in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, your salespeople may uncover insights, but they won't share them. And then the other one is we conduct surveys each year. And I often, kind of get ornery, and it's like, well, how's that working for you? Well, I mean, it's almost like they're checking the box. They're going through the motions. I did my surveys, but did you learn anything new? Did it validate anything that you were concerned about? So again, we don't recommend leaving this in just the hands of your salespeople, and we don't recommend just what's commonly called survey slapping people, where you send it out and then you send it out and you keep sending it out, and eventually they grow frustrated. We've actually had customers, when we interview them, say, please tell them to stop sending me so many emails about their surveys. Who should never conduct voice of customer research? Just put it into the chat. What do you think? I've kind of shared my opinion, but what does the data say? Who should never do customer research? Product managers, marketing managers, salespeople, business owners, and leaders. Which one would you pick? A, B, C, or D? A, product managers. Interesting. Business owners. Another A. Well, I want to keep us moving and be respectful of your time. Salespeople. I recommend that salespeople sell. I recommend that we train our salespeople to be very effective and efficient. I recommend that our salespeople are seen as industry consultants, not what I refer to as pitch slapping people, where they just keep pitching features and benefits and hoping that somebody raises their hand and says, yes, I want to buy from you. Salespeople, um, I don't believe, and I've also seen the data, should never do voice of customer research. So why do you think that is? If that's true, I'm just curious why you would think salespeople should never do that. Oh, I see somebody said all of the above. That's a good answer. Why do you think I'm saying we shouldn't have salespeople do voice of customer research? I'm just curious. What have you experienced? Chances are everyone on this call has salespeople. Well, I could start with bias. We can't help it. We all have bias. But salespeople have a bias because, what if, like what we discovered in one of our clients' projects, their third largest account, an account that represented 11% of revenue, was leaving. And the reason they were leaving was the salesperson. The salesperson was behaving badly, right? They had never been trained. Now, if the salesperson was doing that research, would they have shared that? Well, if you have a high psychological safety, chances are they might. But there's also buyer bias. So let me get this straight. Somebody that I've worked on and built a relationship with over the years is asking me a question. Am I going to tell them the truth and risk rocking our relationship? Or am I going to tell them what I think they want to hear, right? So that's why you want somebody else doing it. Also, salespeople should be focused on selling. If you look at the data, it's dropping every year. Salespeople are spending less than 30% of their days selling. So why would we add something else? We should be taking things away so that they're spending 50, 60% of their time customer facing. The best people to do this kind of insight work are people who don't have a direct relationship with that customer. So just for fun, we just completed a project some time ago, and I give the CEO credit. He goes, I really like, because we actually custom develop questions. We want them to sound like the way your industry talks. And at the end, the CEO says, hey, Mark, stay on the call. We were on a Zoom call. And he says, let's do this. Could you give me a list of these questions and have my salespeople take it? Sure. So we asked the sales team of this it's about a $240 million manufacturer. How satisfied are your customers? What's their satisfaction level? What do you think they said? You could put it into the chat. What do you think? 65, B, 90, quite a few 90s, D, 65, B, 90. Yeah, we took all the salespeople, we asked them to fill this out, and what we heard across the board was around 90, sometimes higher. A couple of them, of course, said 100%. But then we did the work, and I actually was speaking at their sales kickoff event, and we shared this data. It's actually 65%. 65% of their customers were happy, very satisfied, but there was a pretty big delta. And we also found, and again, we asked them a lot of questions, how many customers of yours aren't satisfied? And everybody said 0, 2%, about 14%. 14% of their customers were not satisfied. There was something that was wrong. And for whatever reason, either we heard it and didn't do anything about it, or we didn't even hear it. And when this really got the CEO's attention, is when three of his largest accounts, those A accounts, those, top 20 accounts that represent 80% of your revenue. Yeah, three of them were in that category. So I just wanted to share this to demonstrate that salespeople are out selling, they're building relationships, they should be uncovering unmet needs, they should be talking about outcomes for your products and services. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend we have them do voice of customer research. So, what kind of insights can we gather from voice of customer research? Well, I'll just give you a few. I'll give you a few real life examples. I can't obviously say the names of the companies because we automatically do an NDA with everybody. But I want you to think if you were given this data, what could you do with it? 40% of prospects quoted did not buy in the last year, but they also didn't buy anything. This particular client was interesting because they gave me access to their CRM. So I actually went in and looked at what did we write in the CRM for the lost sale. Often what I read was lost sale to less expensive option, lost sale to product with more features and benefits. But when we interviewed people that they quoted but did not close, 40% didn't do anything. And as I teach in my training, a large percentage of sales is lost to people doing nothing, not taking any action. There's something out there called decision fatigue. There's some great articles by Harvard if you haven't read them. We're having to make 10 times more decisions every day than what we did even 3 years ago. But the other insight that was fascinating when we interviewed people is 30% of the people we interviewed said, you know what, I didn't do anything, but I need to now. I need this. And it was a very large piece of equipment. It's around $770,000. It's a piece of manufacturing equipment, but it significantly improves throughput. It improves margin. Now, this company's plan for the year was to continue to reach out and do cold calls on, their customer base. But after this data point, to the credit of the CEO, one of their first action items in the first quarter was to reach out to everybody we've quoted before. And that turned into a huge spike in revenue. 14% of large accounts are not satisfied today. If you learn that, what would you do? Well, you'd probably want to know why. You'd probably want to dive a little bit deeper. You probably would even, like when one of my clients, I train their salespeople of how to go in and have like a discovery question to get to the root of the issues. 24% of customers share the only reason they don't buy 100% from you is they need a lower priced line. Now, what's interesting or disturbing is this customer that I was doing the work for actually had a lower priced line, but the customers didn't know. 4 of your top 20 accounts are planning to leave in the next 12 months. So not only would we tell you the number 4, we would actually tell you who they are and anything that they shared on the call. To the credit of one of the CEOs I mentioned earlier, his third largest account had planned to leave. In the CRM, the salesperson said, customer going in a new direction, anticipate sales dropping off. But after we interviewed him, the CEO got on the phone. Him and the vice president of sales got on an airplane, and they spent almost half a day with the customer. And not only did they keep the business, because the time to keep a customer is before they leave. If they leave and you try to win them back, that's going to be a lot of time and often very expensive. But yeah, they won them back and actually grew the customer. 79% of new customers came from referrals. What could you do if you knew that to be true? Here's one that we're hearing no matter what industry, what customer we're helping. I want to see your salespeople face to face again. At the end, I'll give you a link to an article called Sales Amnesia. Up to the pandemic, people were behaving like they always had. During the pandemic, if you had product, you sold it. And sales became very easy, but those sales muscles, atrophy. After the pandemic, we still have people that haven't gone back out and seen their customers. 85% of current customers came from a salesperson's cold call. Love this one. That one even shocked me. I would have assumed, because of the nature of this technological product, that a lot of the business came from the internet. No, when we asked them, how did you first engage with this particular customer? They would say, somebody from the company reached out multiple times. I eventually had a meeting and started working with them. So in that particular space, we know cold calling is working. But what's ironic is that today the sales force isn't doing a lot of cold calling. So to the CEO's credit, we launched a program to help them um, have prospecting skills, very focused on ideal customers. Here's another one. We shop for solutions at trade shows and conferences, not online. I never would have expected that. Not only did they tell us that, they told us the two shows that my customer needed to attend. And in their plan for the following year was to withdraw from those shows because they didn't feel they were getting any traction. We're not buying your smart app for your machine, a huge industrial machine. They're about 1.7 to 2.5 million because of cybersecurity risks. Now, I do a lot of face-to-face debriefs, but quite a few of them because my customers are all over, we're on the Zoom call. The CEO's face literally turned red. I'm talking like veins coming out of his neck. And he just burst out, Mark, we prepared for this. How do they not know that it's not a risk? Well, I'm just giving you the data. And once we overcome that, because their value proposition was this smart app, that's what they felt made them different than all their competitors. And here, people didn't trust it. A shift in decision-making authority. I was helping a training company, and all of a sudden their sales drifted. It drifted off. Very successful training company. And we interviewed. And what we found was the HR managers used to be able to spend up to a specific amount, but that had changed. And in their particular industry, now the CFO was holding the purse strings, and my customer never spoke with the CEO. My customer was relying on the HR manager's ability to sell the CFO. So we created systems, processes. One of the steps we added was actually having a call with the CEO and CFO and talking about outcomes and return on investment. We looked at the persona of a CFO and gave them what they needed to make decisions. And it only took about 6 months. And not only did sales get back on track, but they started showing growth. 70% of your large A accounts are satisfied, but 22% are not. 34% of your accounts went to your website before speaking to your salesperson. So my challenge is, does your website match what your salespeople are saying? And I'm not trying to make you feel nervous, but if it doesn't, people buy based on trust and competence. If your salespeople are saying things that are not called out on your website, it breaches trust very quickly. 3 of your top 10 accounts share they want it face-to-face. We heard that already. Your new customers in the last 12 months, on average, are 7% less satisfied than your current customers. That one, again, shocked the senior leadership team of one of my clients. But we worked together and we actually created some new processes for new customers. And if something went bump in the night, we knew about it and we took corrective action. And again, this customer does voice of customer research every 6 months. So we anticipate that score going up. A large client shares there's a tremendous opportunity and growth for a new market for a current product, and they want to work together to develop it. Now, again, I'm not beating up on the salesperson, but how does the salesperson not know this? And did they bring it back to corporate and were shot down? Oh, that doesn't make sense. We've tried that. So anyways, to the credit of this company, the vice president of sales had a meeting with this client and they developed a strategy to work together. 23% of your current customers share they do not value your current product training. Ouch. This was a distributor, and they were sharing how much money they were spending on training, and a pretty large percentage of their customers weren't valuing it. 67% of your customers shared your current invoicing and billing system is frustrating. I mean, that's how deep into the weeds our customers will get with us, but also with others in your company. They're not salespeople. 30%, 37% of customers are concerned with on-time shipments, so they added a backup vendor. Ouch. So maybe we knew our on-time shipments were not hitting what they needed to be. Maybe we knew we were shipping some orders short, but then, shipping them complete within weeks. But did we know that we were actually losing business and our top competitor got in the door because of this? Had we known that, I can promise you your senior leaders would have figured out a way to fix it. So let's share some outcomes. People are like, wow, Mark, that's an awful lot. I mean, I could go on forever. I love doing this. I love exploring and finding new things. It's like a puzzle, right? But let's just talk about real examples. Back in the day, and again, I'm dating myself. Sometimes when I do training, people in the audience had never bought a CD. But back in the day when compact discs came out, they were originally in a piece of cardboard, about half the size of a record album. And then the manufacturers decided just to ship them in the jewel case alone, and theft went up 30%. So I was working for a company at the time. I was their vice president of sales and marketing. And instead of doing what our top competitor did, they designed a product and shipped a sample to everybody that sold CDs. We hit the road for about 3 months and we interviewed people. We actually found that there's 3 different applications that people needed. We found some insights that, you know what, if you're going to build this, it'd be great if you could. And we grew the business $38 million in 18 months. And I guess the part that the CEO liked the most was we had that kind of growth, but at an increased margin. And oh, by the way, sometimes voice of customer research turns into new products. I don't know if you've been in a Best Buy or other retailers lately and seen this black thing that has like um, uh, straps around it and it's adjustable. That came because the customers that we solved their other security problems with said, what about this? What about these products? And they started bringing us so many different products of so many different sizes. But to the credit of our engineering team, they gathered the requirements and they came up with, back in the day, what we called the spider wrap. I'm not sure what they call it today, but it was over $20 million in new sales because they came to us with their problems and they continue to feed that company new product challenges and needs today. One of my favorite jobs is I was asked to come out and help a company that sold vans for people in wheelchairs. And again, I mentioned earlier, they thought it was their innovation, their design, their manufacturing, their engineering. What I discovered interviewing people is it was actually because it was very quiet, as you can see in the picture there. The ramp actually disappears into the floor. And if you've been in a wheelchair any length of time, other alternatives had a ramp that folded up. And while you drove, it rattled. It was hard to have conversations. It was hard to listen to the radio. It's just annoying. So to the credit of the design team, they designed a ramp that went into the floor. But more importantly, I was out, again, just asking questions. My regional managers were in trying to get orders, and I was sitting in the lobby of these service centers, just talking to people in wheelchairs. And I'll never forget, it was one of our dealers on Howe Road in Akron. And there was a gentleman sitting there and he says, you folks aren't all that smart, which got my attention. And he says, people in wheelchairs, we have about 25% less disposable income. So why don't you guys start converting used vehicles and drop the retail another 10, 15 grand? I think you're going to open up a whole new market. Well, we took that idea and ran with it. Today, that industry, over 70% of sales are now used vehicles. Chances are they were at a rental company like Avis or Hertz, And then every August, they dump a lot of vehicles. So we bought used vehicles, we converted them, and it turned into rapid growth for that company. Another one, we were working with a distributor and we just were asking a lot of questions. And this distributor had made serious investments in a lot of the ways they served their customers. And their customers actually said some of them they're not using, some of them actually were kind of a pain. So we adjusted their cost of sales and reduced their cost of sale by 8%. So these are all just examples, a couple more examples. A building and supply company grew over 20% in a market that was down last year, 16%. Machine company sold more units in the month of December of 2024 than it did the entire year of 2023. A financial services company. The owner came to us and said, look, I want to retire, but my business really isn't worth what I need it to be, so I could have a really nice, ride off into the sunset. So we did voice of customer research. We discovered the top 3 influencers that their customers turn to. We created training for those people, tools for those people. And we more than doubled the company in 18 months. And actually what surprised us was by implementing things that we learned, the company was growing so fast, the owner said, I don't want to leave yet. I'm having a lot of fun now. Another plastics manufacturer, again, I've spent a lot of time in plastics, discovered a new market problem, and they developed a new material blend. So one of their products had drifted into a new channel. You probably see that every once in a while, one that you never would have dreamed. But then they started getting phone calls that the product wasn't performing. Well, the product wasn't designed for that application. So we went down, we understood the application, we gave it to our engineering team, we gave it to our raw material suppliers, we fixed the problem, and we saw about a $10 million increase in 24 months. So I've done a lot of talking, and hopefully I've convinced you that, you know what, I want to call and interview a couple customers. So what are your customers concerned about? What are their challenges? What are their constraints? Manufacturing businesses, I'm hearing things like reshoring, nearshoring, the fear of tariffs and how am I going to react? Sustainability, automation, AI-driven manufacturing, advanced materials and 3D printing, and succession. Succession comes up in almost every conversation. Quite a few of the senior leaders are retiring out, and they need to do a much better job preparing the next generation. And I don't care what industry it is, at some point in the conversation, when we ask about how they're being served, they say something like, I don't need reps pitch slapping me. I need an industry consultant to help me. So the question is that who you have? Can your salespeople today have really good conversations that demonstrate competence, build trust, uncover unmet needs, and solve problems for your customers? That's what they're asking. That's what they're telling us they need. So then we take all the data, we develop your growth plan, but we develop it based on data. It's hard sometimes to do my job. We've got about 6 more minutes. There was a client I was helping. We went out, we interviewed his customers. He had a belief that he was the only person in North America making this particular product. And because of that belief, I can't blame him. He marked it up 70%. But when we went out and interviewed him, that was true 10 years ago. We went out and interviewed his customers. Now there's 3 other people doing it. And not only are they doing it, their quotes were like 20, 30% less. So one of the insights we gathered was quite a few people said, it actually gives me pause because if they're that much higher on this one product, I wonder how much higher they are on everything else that we're buying from them. So I delivered that. That did not go over well with the CEO. He actually argued with me that it couldn't be true because it was a family business, 3rd generation. But again, data trumps gut and intuition. So my challenge to you, I was really blessed. One of the companies I was this training manager for, called Timken, they make one of the largest bearing companies in the world, sent me to Harvard. And it said, if we don't take action after learning something new, 90% of what we just learned, we're going to forget. Just the way our brains are wired. Probably even sooner now because of the amount of information and distractions that we face. So my challenge is, what are you going to do? Are you going to maybe call your top 3 customers and not try to sell them, but just make sure they're happy? Are you going to talk to your marketing and maybe mid-level managers and develop a plan that we go out and interview a statistically significant number of clients? Are you going to look at a third-party research firm? Um, are you going to assess your salespeople, make sure they have the skills to execute your plan? I'm just recommending, and again, you're all going to get a PDF of these slides, so feel free to share them with others on your team. We've got about 4 more minutes. Are there any really quick questions? Because I've got some other things I'm going to give you here in the next few minutes. Any questions about voice of customer research? Any concerns you would have? Um, who do you never do voice of customer research with? How would you answer that question? What customer or prospect should you never do voice of customer research with? How would you answer that question? Well, the answer is, if somebody is in the sales process, they're in your pipeline, they're going through the formal sales process, we don't want to be interviewing them while they're in the process. What we want to do is we want to interview them after they've engaged. We want to interview them after they've bought and experienced your product or service, but we don't want to do it and do anything that hurts the sale. Um, Again, I wrote a couple books. Feel free to look for them. On my blog, I have a lot of articles taken from my books. There's some information about me and how to connect. I hope you reach out and want to connect on LinkedIn. I try to post something useful twice a week. And here's that link I told you about. I created a self-assessment. People get really nervous, like, wow, I don't know if I want other people knowing my business. So I created a real simple self-assessment. It's a PDF. You download it. It's just to help you. It's directional. It's not going to give you a lot of deep insights, but I promise you what it will do is it'll help you understand if your team has what it takes to execute your plan this year. Um, my website has a lot of information that's free. I've got a blog, a book, I've got a YouTube channel, lots of videos. I wrote 2 new pieces of content. Post-pandemic, we're seeing new sales roles popping up. We've always had hunters and farmers, but now we're seeing fishermen, which is a new role. It's somebody that captures a lead in a digital conversation and reels that order in. But also, unfortunately, post-pandemic, those salespeople that have sales amnesia, I'm calling them babysitters. They're not selling anymore. They're waiting for the phone to ring. They're taking orders, but they're not aggressively selling. So I talk about that in the book. Quite a few people want to improve their sales skills. I'm a big fan of continuous learning. So I wrote a free white paper you can download on, how sales training reimagined and how to improve the skills of your team. And then there's that resource I mentioned, sales amnesia. When I interviewed branch managers for one of the distributors, not only do I interview customers, sometimes I actually interview your staff. One of the things that just kept coming up was, I need to get my salespeople selling again. So in that article, I share, what we learned and how to get your team back on track. So does anybody have any questions before we end? Again, my team is going to send you a PDF of this. They're also going to send the recording if you'd like. How would you connect voice of customer research when you're in the early stages of a startup? That's a great question. We've done this before, but what you have to do is you actually have to go out and research and interview your ideal customers. The trick is going to be not selling them. Just tell them right up front, look, we're doing some research in this particular industry, and we'd like 15 minutes of your time. You've been identified as somebody that, has been in this industry for some time and could give us some insights. And then you prepare really good questions. If you do this and you listen and you take really good notes, I recommend everybody you interview gets a thank you. Ideally, a thank you from your CEO. One of my clients that I just helped about, I think it was 6 months ago, the CEO actually wrote handwritten notes to his customers thanking them for participating. And then, if you feel so bold, I actually encourage you to share some of the insights that you learned. Here's what we heard, and here's what we're going to be doing. So hopefully that answers your question. So again, thank you for being on our session today. You'll be able to get the slides if you want to share them with anybody. And again, I'd love to talk more with people that are interested in voice of customer research and how it can impact your business. Thank you.